Alright, in the last few videos of this series, we talked about the zigzag opening and some possible anti-moves that red can play to give white a hard time to win. We talked about moves such as 2, 4, and 6. Today, we're going to talk about what happens if red plays 5. White, in this case, would have 3 possible ways to win. You can either play 2, make 2 on the third row. You can play 4 to take this A3, D6 diagonal, or he can take 7 and cover the right side, prevent red from making it easy even on the right side. We'll start by talking about 7. So white plays 7, red has 2 options. Red either has to play 2, try to make a counter odd, in which case then white would have to build on top, and red would have to go on top once again. But now white simply has an easy win when he makes the odd on the right side. Note that if red tries to make a counter odd on the left by playing on 2, then white simply undercuts by playing on 6. He has a lower even, so this odd's useless. Easy win for white. And alternately, if he plays 7, block the odd, then white has an easy win on the left by playing 2. So neither of these moves are good, and 2 is probably not a good move, which means red only has to play 7. That's the only other move he can play. And white, again, he has many ways to win. He could play on 4, take the diagonal, and red doesn't have much to do here. He could, say, play 3, try and make an even on the right. White should be careful here not to play 2, because when he plays 2, red takes this odd, and when red takes this odd, even though white takes the even here, the key to this even is that white wants to eventually be able to bring this piece over here so he can make the odd, but because of red making the odd over here, he would win immediately, so that doesn't work. Red would play on 6 in this case in order to continue with his draw, because if he were to play any other move, let's say if he plays on 2, then white can actually win with a really clever trick, which I'm going to show in a different variation in just a moment. So white should be careful not to play on 2 here because of the giving red an odd. So white, alternate moves, he can just wait it out. He can play 6. Red doesn't really have many good moves. Red can try and block this. White simply blocks on top. And red doesn't have many more other moves. He doesn't want to give this diagonal up, so maybe his best move is to play on 1. Then white would play on 3. And red is soon running out of moves. He eventually has to give up one of these diagonals. For example, if he plays 3, then obviously white comes down, red blocks, makes the odd. If he plays here instead, white takes this valuable diagonal, red comes up here to block, white gets the 6th row, which will help him build up to c5, and red obviously doesn't have much of a choice here. He's going to have to give this up. So yeah, this is actually, playing 7 would lead to a pretty easy win here. I'm not seeing too many other possible ways red can win here. I mean, red can play 2, white takes this diagonal, and then since red no longer has the even here, now white's threatening an even both on b5 and f1. For example, if red plays here, white takes the even here, which will support the odd over here. There's really not much red can do. So if white plays 7 here, I would say he probably has a pretty comfortable win. If he plays 4 instead, then Red has several moves. One, he could take the right side, in which case white has to play on 5 because of having 2 on the 6th row, and also some taking part of this diagonal in the future. Red doesn't want to play here, as we mentioned before. He can play here, perhaps. White can stall by playing on 3 and blocking the possible even. Red, again, will soon run out of moves. Red could try and go for a Zig Zag. This can build on top, doesn't really matter. White plays here. Red eventually, again, has to give up one of these 2 diagonals. If he plays here, then same thing as before. So that's why this is important to take this cell, because of this diagonal. Yeah, so alternatively, white can play here, which actually leads to a tricky variation if white isn't careful. Best bet would be for red to take the odd here immediately, because we've talked about how this odd can prevent white from making 3 in the third row here unless white has other threats. White should be careful here not to play on 2 because it doesn't really accomplish anything. As we said, if white can't build on the 3rd row here, he's not going to be able to build on the 5th row either. And red has a pretty comfortable win simply by playing on this diagonal. And this can't be undercut because then white would have to build up to here. But if white ever builds up to here, red would win over here. So that can't happen. So white should keep both sides open. He plays 7. Red obviously has no choice to block. And white, if he takes this now, then red has some possibilities. Red could play 6, block the even, although he has an even here, so no, the point of 6 isn't to block the even. There's a trick here involving building up this 6th column, which we'll soon see. White could block an even over here if he wants. Also keep this diagonal open. Red probably, if he plays here or if he plays on here, doesn't really matter. Let's say he plays here. White has many ways to win. He plays here, here, here. Eventually, red's going to be in Zig Zag because we've talked about this pattern before where white ends up winning with a double threat. We talked about in the last video. He plays like this, then block, 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 wins. Alternatively, red could say, play over here. And the reason this is a good move is because now, as we said, that white can't win on the left side because this odd is preventing white from getting 3 in the 3rd row. And it doesn't really seem apparent that white has any sort of a threat on the right side in which he can win with. So how does white win here? There's actually a clever way for white to win here, but he can't waste any time. If he doesn't make the correct move here, then red will be able to draw him. For example, let's say white tries to take 4, which at this point is useless because this diagonal and this diagonal is both blocks of 4, doesn't really accomplish anything. Red draws by playing 2, and at this point there's not much white can do to win. Instead, if white immediately builds on 1 to get a head start in the race, now say red plays 6, white immediately builds on 1 again, which is pretty counterintuitive because white has... You would think that white will want to preserve the 3rd row here, but in fact he has to figure out a way to win on the right side because there's no way for him to win on the left. So builds on top here, red blocks, white makes a threat, block, 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 and then white makes the odd coming from top down. He makes a diagonal. And notice that if we follow the same pattern, but instead of having white play on 1 right away, we'll say he plays on 4, red plays here, and now he plays here. Now white plays here. Now red plays on top, and this no longer works because the odd has been cancelled because of this F2 cell, and white will get nothing else better than a draw. So that's what I was talking about earlier when I was talking about building up the sixth column. And yeah, so that pretty much covers everything with this anti-move, and I imagine I've talked about just about everything in this opening in general. If you think I missed anything, don't hesitate to message me, and maybe next time I'll do a series on a different opening.